Yeah, so I'm Zain. I'm one of the coordinators for Saveoldgrowth, and over the past year and a half, I've been involved in many different campaigns. And during that time, I've been arrested 10 times, and I've done one 7-day hunger strike. And on a different occasion, we asked the Simon Fraser University to divest fully from fossil fuels, and we threatened to do a hunger strike, and it didn't come to it, and the Simon Fraser University ended up having to divest. And to me, that showed how powerful direct action can be, and sometimes just the threat of direct action can be very powerful. So we're trying to really take that model and we're putting it at a massive scale. In this case, in the case of the provincial government, we've given them a deadline, and if they don't end all active old growth logging by that deadline, then we're going to start disrupting the Trans Canada Highway indefinitely. Um, yeah, and I'll be going to prison in February. And this is one of the things that this campaign is about starting the process of people showing the government that they're not afraid of going into prison for as long as it takes in order to get a win. Yeah, so we've sent out a formal demand to the British Columbian government a few weeks ago, asking them to immediately end all old growth logging. And if they don't fulfill that promise, which is their own election promise, by the 9th of January, then by the 10th of January, we'll start disrupting the Trans Canada Highway at multiple points. And the beauty of this campaign is that it can go throughout Canada because the Trans Canada Highway goes across Canada. And this is modeled after the historical tradition of what we call a dilemma demand, meaning we ask something of the government which is in their own party manifesto and in their own election promise. So it's a win-win for everyone. And if we can't get a win on this, then we can't get a win on anything at all in the climate movement. So that's what we need to know, is that if we can't win this, then we can't win anything. So we need to go all out on this and get a win. And the only way to do that is by challenging and actively outgrowing activist traditions that we've been taking part in over the past 30 years that just objectively don't work. For example, banner drops, marches, and petitioning, all of these things don't work. They're not necessarily bad ideas in and of itself, but during times of extreme emergencies and injustice, and when we're dealing with entrenched power, marches and petitions don't work. If you're dealing with littering in your neighborhood, you can do a petition or do a march and you can get that problem solved. But when you're dealing with the most genocidal government in human history, then we need to take part in what you call high risk and high return actions, meaning we need to cause enough disruption in society that it engages the society and the whole country in a national debate that we force on the country and the government and the media so that they have to address an issue that they have failed to address in the past. And this usually involves public disruption. And it involves transforming the emotional space of the public through transgressive acts non-violently. And we've seen this happen recently in the UK with Insulate Britain, who are a group of less than 100 people who are demanding the insulation of all housing in the UK. And they're going on the M25, which is their main highway system around London, day after day. And they've gone on the road 17 times. A lot of people have been arrested multiple times. Some people have been arrested 10 times, 14 times. And they've been able to get on national television because of this transgressive act every single day. And they've been communicating the truth to the public that we've got 3 to 4 years left to save humanity, which is what the former chief scientific advisor of the British government has said. So it's something we need to take seriously. And the logic behind this is that a minor demand like this, like insulation or like saving the old growth forests of BC, gives the climate movement a win for the first time. And the way in which you change society historically is that you start with a minor demand and then you keep escalating. So there's a global project that is happening in different countries where different countries have different demands that they're trying to force the government to adopt through high-level civil resistance. In Germany, we have Last Generation, and we have Insular Britain in the UK. We've got Save Old Growth here in Canada. And it usually goes in the form of 2 or 3 iterations, where you do a first iteration where you mobilize a lot of people and get a lot of press coverage, and then you pause and you do a lot of recruitment And then you do another iteration where you escalate the demand and the tactics potentially, and you're more likely to get a win on that if you've already got a win on the minor demand. And then you do what's objectively necessary in 2022, which is you try to force regime change, or you bring about a transfer of power from people who are guilty and complicit in the greatest genocidal act in human history, and you find out a way to decarbonize the economy within a matter of a few years. And the way we do it is by getting a win, as I mentioned earlier. And this is based on the historical tradition of the civil rights movement. In the civil rights movement, you had the Montgomery bus boycotts in the 50s, where tens of thousands of people boycotted the buses, and everyone was really happy, and everyone went home. It was a bit like spring 2019 with the climate movement. Everyone was really excited, everyone was out, and then it all vanished. And with the civil rights movement for 10 years, people were talking about nothing was going on. People were like, does nonviolence even work? What should we do? And 10 years later, a group of young people decided that they weren't going to wait 50 more years to get a win. And 4 people decided to sit down on buses, go down to Alabama to demand the desegregation of interstate busing. And it started with just 4 people, so they didn't do a long consultation process with the traditional movement, with the mainstream movement. And those 4 people went down to Alabama. They got their bus got caught. It was set on fire. They were beaten up. They were sent to prison for a few weeks. And 3 days later, 24 people came down and went to prison. And then a few months later, 300 people were in prison. And then 400 people were in prison. By the time 430 people were in prison, then the government had to issue legislation to desegregate interstate busing. So it began with 4 people. It was unpopular within the movement, and it managed to change the national conversation through transgressive acts that would force the attention of the country. So there's an interview that you can watch where a person is bleeding in their head, and they're being asked by the reporter what their plan is now, and they were like, as soon as I get better, I'll get back on the bus. So that's the historical tradition of the level of sacrifice that's needed even to get a minor demand, so that you can put the movement on the right track, so that ultimately within the next couple of years we can get the win we need, the win that we necessarily need. Otherwise we're guaranteeing societal collapse. So over the next 6 months, Save Old Growth will be going on the road to demand the end of all old growth logging, and we will escalate our tactics in their frequency if the government continues to not respond. So we will block the Trans-Canada Highway at different off-ramps, so the traffic is stationary, people go on an off-ramp, on a crosswalk, they move on the crosswalk when the traffic is stationary, and they sit down, and they show complete nonviolence when faced with violence from the public and the police. And those videos will go around the country, and that's going to be the first step in changing the national conversation, where people find out slowly that what is stereotypically known as like nice Canadians aren't that nice, and we instead have a very real problem of entrenched power in the country, where a society is refusing to address that we're faced with the greatest criminal government in human history, and we're going about our day without recognizing that. And just to solidify that point more, we need to recognize that the Earth is a gas chamber. We literally rely on certain gases to survive. And for the past 30 years, the governments have known full well what the science is and what the consequences are. And they've been putting a poisonous gas in the Earth's atmosphere, which will lead to societal collapse and the potential extinction of the human race. So what we're resisting it's not an issue. It's not like healthcare or like childcare or just any other normal sort of issue that we face in society usually, and that we can resolve through marching and petitioning and banner drops. So if you imagine like a ball going down a hill, we have to recognize that. So here's a diagram that sort of shows this. If you have a ball going down a hill, if a kid is chasing down the ball, it doesn't matter if the kid is 10 meters away from the ball or 2 inches away from the ball. What matters is that in both cases you're going to lose the ball. So if you're over here and you're 10 meters away from the ball, then you lose the ball. And then if you're over here and you're 2 inches away from the ball at point two, you still lose the ball. So it doesn't matter if you're over here or over here. What you need to do is you need to be here, or else you're not getting anywhere. And so, just to give an example, banner drops are over here. Like, they might be good at getting attention, but they're not going to solve the greatest crime in human history. And marches are also really good at getting attention, but again, you're not catching the ball, you're not doing what's necessary to create societal change. And when you disrupt the Trans-Canada Highway 3 times a week and keep escalating and keep having arrests, then we might be in the ballpark of creating the change that we need. And we know from the historical tradition that the number is binary. So it's a bit like a labor strike. When workers go on strike, they don't just do it for 2 days and then go home. They do it for a few weeks, and they do it for as long as it takes until the employers go in, until the accountants go in and tell the employers that they're losing too much money. So the employers don't pay any attention until it's finally too much. And just to give an example of what's going on right now, which is a sister sort of campaign to Save Old Growth, which is happening in Germany. It just recently happened where 20 German youth around in their 20s did a hunger strike where they told the government and the main political parties that they wanted public Zoom debate with them, and that they were doing an indefinite hunger strike. They did it for 1 week, they did it for 2 weeks, and it started getting on the local papers. They did it for 25 days, and the press all of a sudden was really surprised by that. Like a bunch of kids in their 20s were on a hunger strike, and that they were going to do it indefinitely, and they could die. So by day 27, the governments and the political parties got in touch with them and said they would do a private Zoom debate. And at that point, the people said no, that what their demand was a public Zoom debate, and that they were going to stop drinking now. And 4 hours later, the leader of the Social Democrats and the future Chancellor of Germany got in touch saying that they were going to do a public Zoom debate after the election. So what we know from this is that they kept going, they didn't stop, and ultimately they got what they wanted. If they had stopped on day 20, they would have never known what the point was. If they had stopped on day 25, they wouldn't have known. If they had stopped on day 27, they wouldn't have known. And it's the same with the Freedom Riders. If they had stopped at 300 people in prison, they wouldn't have known. If they had stopped at 400 people in prison, they wouldn't have known. But by the time they were at 430 people, that's when they got their win. So the point of this campaign is that it's simple and it's straightforward. Anyone can go on an off-ramp on the Trans-Canada Highway, and people will be sitting down and non-violently stopping traffic. And at that point, the public will get violent, and the videos will go around the world and around the country. And after a certain point, the tension in society will be too great for the government to keep ignoring this really basic demand.